Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the language of Ooh, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. The land of Ooh has always felt alive with sound. The hum of wind through candy hills, the crackle of fire from distant volcanoes, and the soft murmur of stars whispering to the night sky. But if you listen closely, beneath the laughter, beneath the adventure, there's another sound entirely. Something older. A language not spoken in words, but carried in ruins, in symbols, in the gentle cadence of time itself. It's strange to think that the people of Ooh, so full of songs and stories, live among the remnants of a world that once spoke in a very different way. Long before Finn, before Jake, before even the Ice King's lonely kingdom of snow, there was a world that spoke our language, the human language. And when that world ended, its words were scattered like ash upon the wind. What remains are fragments, pieces of speech and writing that drifted across centuries of mutation, magic, and rebirth. The way Princess Bubblegum mixes scientific English with incomprehensible candy jargon. The cryptic runes scrawled on old walls and maps. The warning signs half buried beneath moss and dust. All of it is the echo of a civilization that once was, now barely remembered. After the Mushroom War, that quiet, apocalyptic storm that changed everything language too had to evolve. The old scripts no longer fit the new world. Machines melted into mountains, cities turned to glass. And the people who survived were changed, some into creatures of magic and sugar and flame. And when people change, so too does the way they speak. Imagine what it must have been like those early days after the war, when the sky was still gray and the ground hummed faintly with strange energy. Survivors might have tried to write to keep records of what had happened. But over time, ink faded, books crumbled, and meaning drifted away. Children of the New Age would find old signs and treat them like charms, thinking them divine or cursed. Words like warning or radioactive might have become prayers or names of forgotten gods. Language, after all, is alive. It grows, mutates, adapts to what it touches. In Ooh, it became something new, a living college of the ancient and the magical. And so, in this quiet, post-apocalyptic dreamscape, we find the descendants of those who could no longer read the world they inherited. The candy people, cheerful but simple, communicating more through emotion and gesture than text. The flame people, their voices flickering with literal heat. Even the rainicorns, whose beautiful, melodic speech seems both alien and ancient, at once a relic of a time when communication might have been more than sound, something woven through energy itself. If you've ever noticed, the characters of Ooh rarely need to explain everything to each other. Their world is intuitive. When Finn looks at a rune carved into stone, or a map filled with impossible symbols, he doesn't always ask what it means, he just feels it. And that might be the point. Maybe in Ooh, understanding isn't purely intellectual. Maybe it's emotional, spiritual, even instinctive. Language, then, isn't just about words, it's about connection. The way BMO hums softly when no one's around, or how Jake stretches into shapes that say more than any sentence could. Even silence carries meaning, especially silence. It's fascinating how remnants of the old world still appear in their stories. Faded stop signs, scribbled notebooks, half-buried computers with screens that flash indecipherable text. These relics remind us that Ooh was built upon the ruins of our civilization. The land itself remembers our language, even if its people no longer do. Perhaps those strange runes scattered across the Ice Kingdom's walls or the dungeons of the Candy Castle aren't the product of pure imagination. Perhaps they're echoes of something older a fusion of human script and magical glyph. Over time, the two may have merged, forming the written language of a world rebuilt from ashes. And that's one of the most hauntingly beautiful things about O. Everything familiar has been reborn into something strange, human speech fractured, mixed with the supernatural, and grew into languages that sound playful, but carry an undercurrent of melancholy, a reminder that every laugh, every silly word, sits atop layers of forgotten sorrow. If you think about it, the language of Oo might not just be spoken by its people. It might be sung by the world itself, the whispering wind, the creaking trees, the bubbling candy rivers. The land is a storyteller, too, speaking through texture, color, and sound. In a sense, Oo's true language might be beyond words. It might be memory. The way Finn calls Jake's name, or how Marceline hums a half-forgotten tune about her mother, these are languages, too. Emotional dialects of love, longing, and memory that require no translation. And when we, as watchers, listen closely, we understand them without needing to speak their tongue. The deeper one looks, the more it feels like the very structure of Oo was built upon communication, not just between beings, but between the past and the present. Every piece of writing, every symbol, is a message sent through time, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes lost, but always there. Some believe that the runes and symbols seen throughout the show are more than decoration, that they might represent the lingering consciousness of the pre-war world, that in some quiet way, the language of humans lives on, hidden beneath layers of whimsy and color, a silent record of all that came before. And maybe that's why so many of Oo's greatest mysteries come in the form of writing. The Enchiridion, the Ice King's journals, the magical glyphs of Princess Bubblegum's lab, all of them are attempts to communicate with forces beyond comprehension. In this land of shifting forms, to write something down is to anchor it, to make it real, because in Oo, words are more than symbols, they are magic themselves. And long before the word magic was ever uttered, language was the first spell humanity ever cast. Somewhere, deep beneath the layers of sugar and starlight, that ancient voice still murmurs. You can almost hear it, if you close your eyes, the language of a world that ended, whispering softly beneath the laughter of a new one. And if we follow that whisper a little deeper, we begin to sense just how tangled the roots of language have become in this world. Words that once meant danger or sorrow might now mean friendship or hope. Think of the word Oo, itself simple, soft, and round. We don't know where it came from or if it even means anything at all. Maybe it was once an abbreviation, a remnant of some forgotten organization or region on an old map. Maybe it was a sound that survived the collapse of every other word because it was easy to say, easy to remember, something that rolled off the tongue like a sigh. Over centuries, that one surviving sound could have become the name of the whole world, Oo, a word with no clear definition, only feeling. And that, in its own way, is how language evolves when time forgets to preserve its pages. It's possible that many of the creatures we see across the land each hold fragments of lost vocabularies, bits of languages carried down from ancestors who once lived in the human age. A robot muttering broken sentences from half-corrupted data. A magical being repeating words it doesn't understand. Because those syllables once carried power. Even Finn's very name short. Almost mythic feels like something ancient that resurfaced in a simpler world. When we listen to the way characters speak, we notice little patterns of survival. The humans of the old world may be gone, but their rhythm lingers. Their idioms, their exclamations, even their jokes, echo faintly in the speech of candy people and wizards and talking animals. It's as if the ghosts of words themselves refuse to fade away. Princess Bubblegum, for example, speaks with the confidence of a scientist, but the words she uses are often mixed with nonsense, as if half her vocabulary has roots in forgotten human science, and the other half in candy chemistry that defies logic. Her notebooks are filled with a hybrid script, sharp, structured letters beside swirls and sigils. Each page reads like a treaty between two worlds, science and magic, logic and intuition. Then there's the Ice King, whose scrawled handwriting is one of the most heartbreaking examples of linguistic decay. His notes slip between coherence and madness, letters bending into strange shapes, thoughts freezing mid-sentence. Somewhere inside him, Simon Petrikov still writes like the man he once was, but the crown's influence twists his words, transforming them into a language only he can understand. His writings are part diary, part incantation, part cry for help. All across Ooh, this same pattern repeats, a language born from loss, reshaped by the strange beauty of survival. The Flame Kingdom, for instance, uses language less as sound and more as resonance. The flicker of a flame's height, or the rhythm of its pulse, conveys meaning, the way tone does in spoken language. Their speech is more music than word language as living light. The Rainicorns, on the other hand, speak in colors. Their language, when translated, seems impossible, each hue carrying layers of meaning, emotion, metaphor, history. Lady Rainicorn's words are literally painted across the air, a visible communication that feels older than sound itself. Some fans believe her language might even predate the Mushroom War, that it comes from another plane of existence where thought and color are the same thing. In the depths of Ooh, we find even stranger examples. The ancient underground civilizations, hinted at in ruins and cryptic carvings, seem to have used symbols that resemble circuitry, a possible remnant of the human world's lost technology. Over time, those mechanical markings became mythic ones, symbols that once guided machines now guide magic. What was once electricity became energy. What was once code became spellcraft. And this connection between technology and magic is where Ooh's languages reveal their truest nature. Because in both, the principle is the same: the use of symbols to shape reality. Whether through ones and zeros or runes and chants, the goal is identical: to communicate with the world and make it respond. Maybe that's why so many of Ooh's surviving artifacts are covered in writing. The Enchiridion, for instance, speaks in riddles of old. Its script is both ancient and adaptive, shifting slightly between episodes as if alive. Perhaps the book changes its words to fit whoever reads it. Perhaps every reader, consciously or not, translates it into the language of their own heart. This living quality of writing is part of what makes Ooh so dreamlike. There is no single, stable tongue, no official language that binds everyone together. Instead, there's a harmony of fragments. Each culture holds a piece of the puzzle, and together they form something beautiful. It's the same way we might listen to a lullaby in a language we don't understand, and yet somehow we still feel its meaning. That's how Ooh's languages work. They're not meant to be decoded perfectly. They're meant to be felt. And if we accept that, if we let go of the need to translate everything, we start to notice the patterns between things. The symbols carved on ruins look strangely similar to the runes of the Nightosphere. The glyphs on BMO's circuits echo the lines of old human code. Even the tattoos of the Magic Man hold familiar geometries, as if all of them trace back to the same primordial alphabet, the first written attempt to speak to creation itself. In a way, every letter, every rune, every musical tone or flicker of light in Ooh is a memory, a way the world remembers what it once was and what it's still becoming. And though the people of Ooh may not remember the names or stories behind those symbols, they carry them forward unconsciously in the way they talk laugh, and dream. Because when a language disappears, it doesn't really die. It becomes the rhythm of everything that comes after. And so the more we listen, the more it feels as if ooh itself is trying to tell a story not through one clear language, but through thousands of quiet, overlapping voices. Each rune, each carved mark, each stray sound in the night is a piece of that story. You could almost imagine that the land remembers the words of every being that ever lived upon it, their echoes woven into the soil, murmuring softly just beneath the surface. There's a scene that captures this beautifully when Finn and Jake explore some ancient ruin, the kind built long before anyone can remember. The walls are covered in faded symbols, and though neither of them can read a single one, there's still a sense of understanding in the air, the quiet, the reverence, as though the building itself hums with the memory of what those words once meant. It's not knowledge through reading, it's knowledge through presence. You don't understand it with your mind, you feel it in your chest. Perhaps that's the truest language of ooh, the one that doesn't rely on comprehension, but resonance. It's the same reason a lullaby can soothe you, even when you don't know the words. The meaning is carried not in vocabulary, but in vibration, in tone, in intention. In this way, every sound in ooh, from BMO's cheerful chirps to the low roar of distant beasts, belongs to the same spectrum of expression. They're all threads in the same tapestry. In this kind of world, language and emotion can't really be separated. When Flame Princess speaks, her words shimmer with heat, a language that literally warms the air. When the Lich speaks, his voice carries not just meaning, but decay, every word eroding what it touches. The Magic Man's speech bends and folds space itself, as though each syllable pulls at the edges of reality. These are not metaphors. In ooh, language is elemental. This might sound fantastical, but if we think of it from the perspective of the mushroom war of humanity experimenting with strange technologies, energies, and AI, it begins to make sense. Perhaps the world's rebirth fused all those forgotten sciences with the natural order, turning once man-made codes into mystical runes. The binary of computers could have become the binary of magic, presence and absence, being and not being. The funny thing is, even those who don't speak any formal language in ooh still communicate. The creatures, the objects, even the weather, the way the clouds seem to react to emotion, or how the trees whisper and lean closer when someone's afraid. Ooh listens constantly. Its language is participatory. When you speak, the world answers back, not in words, but in movement and change. And that responsiveness is what makes the land feel so dreamlike, as if the boundaries between speech, thought, and creation have melted away. There's a purity to it. In our world, language builds walls between things it defines, categorizes, separates. But in ooh, it unites. Everything communicates because everything is alive, and everything alive has something to say. This also explains why the people of so rarely question the strange words or writing they encounter. To them, the unknown isn't frightening, it's natural. They've grown up surrounded by languages that overlap, contradict, and evolve constantly. There's no expectation that everything should be understood. Meaning in ooh is fluid, like the landscape itself. It shifts, depending on who listens. Think of the mysterious graffiti found in places like the ruins of the Candy Kingdom or the old human dungeons. Some of those symbols appear in multiple episodes, drawn in different contexts, sometimes glowing faintly as if aware of being watched. Fans have speculated for years that these are remnants of a universal code, perhaps, something the humans created to preserve their knowledge after the war. Others believe they're manifestations of magic itself, written by no hand at all, the world's subconscious, etched into stone. Both ideas could be true. Maybe the languages of ooh are not invented, so much as remembered collective memories that surfaced naturally through whoever happens to be alive at the time. When Peppermint Butler draws runes on the ground for a spell, maybe he's not learning from a book. Maybe he's recalling something imprinted deep within the world's memory, an instinct left behind by ancient beings. Even Finn, though human, often seems to understand things without needing to read or study them. He feels them. It's as if being human, one of the last remnants of the old world, allows him to sense the undercurrents of these ancient languages in a way others can't. He doesn't need to speak the words, he already carries them. His actions, his sense of right and wrong, his drive to protect all of it, speaks in a universal tongue the land recognizes. And that might be the reason why so many magical entities in the show respond to him. They seem to know him before he ever introduces himself, because in ooh, being understood doesn't require language at all. It requires presence. The language of ooh at its core may be the language of being existence speaking to existence. When you think of it that way, even time begins to sound like a sentence. Each moment, each echo of the past, a word written across the fabric of reality. Every ruin, every whisper, every memory is part of a long and ongoing dialogue between what was and what is. So when Finn or Jake stumble upon an old machine humming faintly in the dark, or when Princess Bubblegum deciphers a symbol she's seen before in some forgotten text, they're not just learning history. They're listening to the voices of the world itself, voices that have been waiting for centuries to be heard again. And perhaps that's what the languages of ooh truly are, a bridge between memory and life, between human and magic, between silence and sound. A reminder that even after the end of everything, communication finds a way. It becomes the air, the stars, the heartbeat of the land. Because once a word has been spoken into existence, it never really fades. It simply changes form, waiting patiently for someone or something to listen. If you imagine the history of ooh as a vast, sleeping creature, then language is the gentle breath that keeps it alive. Every sigh of wind through an abandoned corridor, every hum of magic in an empty valley feels like the land inhaling and exhaling its own story. Even the silence has texture, the kind that feels full, like a pause between words rather than an absence of them. Somewhere in that silence, perhaps beneath the snow of the Ice Kingdom, or in the cracks between ancient candy bricks, the last traces of the human tongue might still linger, not in any readable sentence, but in patterns, the layout of ruin, the design of a staircase, the rhythm of architecture itself. The humans of the old world built with meaning, encoding function, and language into everything they made. After the Mushroom War, those meanings outlived their makers. The buildings themselves became phrases of a forgotten language, slowly rewritten by time and magic. We can almost see that process continuing in the present day. The Ice King's palace, for instance, is shaped like memory, sharp, crystalline, and echoing. Every jagged edge feels like an unfinished word. When light passes through the ice, it refracts into symbols that dance across the walls. Maybe that's what Simon sees in his lonely hours, the world trying to talk back to him, his surroundings forming a quiet dialogue with the fragments of his old self. The Candy Kingdom, too, tells a similar story, though in sweeter tones. Its candy citizens may appear innocent, but their very existence speaks of a linguistic paradox, creatures born of science and language intertwined. Princess Bubblegum literally created life through words, equations, and intent. Her formulae are not just recipes, they're incantations. In her world, the syntax of chemistry is indistinguishable from spellcraft. When she writes, She's not merely recording thought, she's constructing reality. Every experiment, every bubbling vial is a sentence rewritten in sugar. This idea stretches even further when we consider U's countless magical texts, the Enchiridion, the Book of Spells, the ancient scrolls kept hidden by wizards. These objects do more than describe magic. They contain it. Words within them don't just signify, they manifest. The letters themselves hold power. It's as though the very concept of language has evolved into something tactile. The act of writing has become indistinguishable from creation itself. And if language holds that kind of power, perhaps that explains why so much of it was lost after the war. Maybe it was too dangerous to survive intact. A word in the wrong hands could reshape the world, and so the world protected itself by fragmenting its speech, scattering the old languages like seeds, ensuring no one voice could wield too much meaning again. The result is U, a patchwork of dialects, runes, and codes that together form a kind of safety. Each being holds a fragment, but only together do they make the whole. You can feel that sense of balance whenever two unlikely characters communicate, like Marceline and Princess Bubblegum, who often seem to understand one another even in silence. Their bond speaks a different kind of language, one built from history, emotion, and shared pain. Every pause between their words says as much as their conversations do. In that way, U teaches us that language doesn't need to be spoken to be real. Understanding can happen through memory, through feeling, through the small gestures that bridge hearts. Even Jake and Finn, best friends bound not by shared origin, but by trust, illustrate this truth. They often finish each other's thoughts or communicate entire ideas through a glance. Their friendship is its own dialect built over years of shared adventures, laughter, and quiet moment. It's the purest form of U's philosophy. Their words are optional when connection runs deep enough. There's a quiet beauty in the idea that the world itself encourages this kind of communication. It's as if U understands that speech can be limiting, that too much clarity can spoil mystery. So it hides meaning within dreams, songs, and symbols, always enough to spark curiosity, never enough to reveal everything. The viewers, much like Finn and Jake, are invited not to translate, but to listen to accept that not every language needs decoding to be understood. And that brings us to the heart of this first chapter, the realization that the languages of U aren't random or whimsical at all. They're the natural evolution of expression in a world reborn from chaos. When humanity fell, the essence of communication didn't die with it. It simply adapted, blending with magic, emotion, and life until everything in U became capable of speaking in its own way. So the next time you see a strange rune glowing on an old stone, or hear a few seconds of dialogue in a tongue that doesn't exist, imagine that you're not just hearing characters in a cartoon. You're listening to the distant heartbeat of a world remembering itself. You're hearing the echo of humanity's oldest instinct, the need to connect, to express, to reach beyond silence. And in that sense, the language of U isn't foreign at all. It's the same language that we still speak when we hum a tune without lyrics, or gaze at the night sky trying to find meaning in the stars. It's the language of memory, love, curiosity, the quiet bridge between the known and the unknown. As the lights fade and the land of U settles beneath a blanket of twilight, those ancient voices still whisper in the air, not in words we can pronounce, but in something deeper, a pulse, a rhythm, a lullaby that has survived every ending. The same lullaby that drifts through every story, every ruin, every dream. And as we drift with it tonight, we can almost hear the world breathe again, softly, patiently, speaking in its oldest and gentlest tongue. When we wander through the quiet corners of Ooh, the ones far away from the laughter of the Candy Kingdom, or the shimmer of magical forests, we sometimes find places that don't quite belong. Crumbling buildings buried in vines, rusted metal towers half swallowed by sand, words still etched on their walls, though no one remembers how to read them anymore. These are the written ghosts of the Mushroom War. They wait in silence, scattered across the land like faint echoes of humanity's last attempt to speak. Most who pass them by see only strange markings, the meaningless graffiti of a world long gone. But if you stop, if you truly listen to the shapes of those letters, you might feel the weight of memory pressing through the stone. The world remembers what was said here. Before the land of Ooh existed, before magic returned and time folded in on itself, there was a civilization that looked very much like ours. People filled their days with invention, creation, and ambition. They built machines to speak for them, to think for them, to record everything they feared to forget. They wrote endlessly in books, in code, in signals that flowed invisibly through the air. Humanity's greatest strength was its language, and its greatest mistake was believing it could control what those words were to become. When the Mushroom War came, the sky turned to glass, and the world's libraries burned. Words, once symbols of progress, became relics of disaster. Warning signs were ignored or misunderstood. Records were erased by flame. But language, as it always does, refused to vanish. Even after humanity fell silent, its writings remained scrawled on bunker walls, blinking faintly on forgotten screens, buried in the ash of 1,000 lost cities. In the world that arose from those ashes, those fragments became holy. The creatures who came after could not read the old texts, but they felt their importance. A cracked billboard might be mistaken for a temple mural. A piece of shattered circuitry might be revered as an idol. Humanity's language, stripped of its meaning, turned into magic by mystery alone. If you've ever looked closely at the ruins in Adventure Time, the ones where vines crawl across the shapes of English letters, you can see this strange transformation happening right before your eyes. Old warning signs, once bright and clear, now look like runes. A single faded word like caution or exit becomes something mythic. A message from forgotten gods. To us, they're relics. To the people of Ooh, they're artifacts charged with unseen power. There's something poetic about that. Words created for order and instruction become, through time and erosion, sources of wonder. The world misremembers them in the most beautiful way. It's as if humanity's final gift to the new age was confusion, but a sacred kind of confusion, the kind that turns knowledge into mystery, and mystery into myth. In many of these ruins, the written ghosts linger not only in the visible markings, but in the air itself. Machines that once communicated through data still hum faintly beneath layers of dirt. Satellites orbit above, whispering messages into the void, unaware that there's no one left to receive them. These signals might still be echoing, bouncing endlessly through the atmosphere, long after their meaning was lost. Perhaps those waves of forgotten language are what give Ooh its strange, enchanted glow, a world bathed in the static of old words trying to find a listener. It's a haunting idea, isn't it? That every beam of light, every flicker of a magical rune, might just be a ghost of human communication. Once upon a time, they were commands, coordinates, love letters, poems. Now they're the hum of existence itself, the background lullaby of a sleeping world. The Mushroom War didn't just end a civilization, it rewrote reality's vocabulary. The explosions that tore through cities scattered radiation, energy, and fragments of language into the soil. Those fragments changed things, not just physically, but symbolically. Where human words once described life, they began to create it. The boundary between language and matter dissolved. Out of that fusion came magic. Perhaps this is why so many of Oo's magical symbols resemble circuitry. Those patterns carved into walls and crystals might once have been electronic diagrams printed on the metal hearts of ancient machines. Over time, their meanings shifted. Electricity turned to energy. Code turned to spell. The world learned to speak in a new accent. There's one particularly eerie detail that recurs in the ruins clusters of symbols that look like letters but slightly off, like handwriting copied too many times. These could be the first written language of post-war survivors, people who no longer remembered the alphabet but still remembered its shape. They imitated it, hoping to preserve meaning, but in doing so, they created something new. That's how alphabets evolve. Not from invention, but from misremembering. And so, when we see strange markings on Oo's broken towers, we might be witnessing that moment of transition, the bridge between human and magical writing, the birth of the new from the ruins of the old. It's humbling to realize how quickly understanding can fade, and how stubbornly beauty can survive in its place. The world after the Mushroom War didn't need to read those words to honor them. The ruins themselves became the language stories told through decay, meaning carried in the pattern of cracks and shadows. Even in destruction, humanity's voice continued to whisper, reshaped by time and wonder. If we close our eyes for a moment, we can almost imagine what it must have felt like for the first creatures of Ooh to stumble upon those remnants of writing. And maybe it was a group of curious candy citizens wandering too far from home, or perhaps a lone wanderer, a shape born from magic, tracing the edge of a rusted sign half buried in moss. They wouldn't have known what the letters meant, but they would have felt something, a quiet vibration, a residue of intent. Words, even forgotten, still hold energy. The ancients had built their world around symbols that commanded machines, and when those machines fell silent, the language they left behind carried a strange echo of authority. To see a word written on metal or glass was to feel instinctively that it mattered, that it once shaped reality. The inhabitants of Ooh inherited that reverence, though they no longer understood it consciously. Their world became a tapestry of half-remembered meanings, stitched together by instinct and awe. That's why so much of Adventure Time's landscape feels like a dream. It's not just because of the strange creatures or whimsical kingdoms. It's because every stone and wall still hums with the ghost of human language. The entire world is haunted by the act of communication itself. Each ruin tells a story, even when no one can read it. When we look at Oo's maps, those hand-drawn, beautifully uneven depictions of rivers and mountains, we might not realize that they're reinterpretations of something much older. Somewhere in the layers beneath the Candy Kingdom or the Ice Mountains, there are maps drawn by human hands, meticulously labeled with coordinates and names. Over centuries, as the survivors or their descendants looked at them, the words blurred, the symbols softened. Letters became shapes, shapes became icons, and icons became runes. Eventually, the maps of Ooh stopped being records of geography and became something closer to art, visual prayers to remember a world long buried. It's a quiet transformation, the same kind that happens to lullabies over time. A song meant to comfort a child turns into a myth, and that myth becomes a spell to keep away the dark. Language decays, but what it means becomes deeper, more resonant. That's what happened in Ooh. Think of the artifacts that characters find from time to time, old books, broken signs, machines with screens that still flicker faintly. When Ice King writes in his journals, his words look familiar but slightly wrong. It's as if he's writing in a dialect that doesn't belong to this world anymore, a survivor's language born from memory. That dissonance between the known and the altered gives ooh its surreal, dreamlike quality. Even Princess Bubblegum, who is perhaps the most learned being in the post-war world, treats the remnants of old human text with both curiosity and caution. She deciphers what she can, but much of it remains beyond even her understanding. She studies the past like a scientist and a believer at the same time, dissecting symbols that once governed electricity and now pulse faintly with magic. And then there's Simon, the man who became Ice King. His story is woven directly into the language of the past. He's one of the few who actually remembers what the old words meant, though even his memories have become fragile, twisted by time and the crown's magic. His writings, scattered across the Ice Kingdom, sometimes read like desperate messages to a world that no longer exists. Letters to Betty, journal entries of confusion and loneliness. His handwriting becomes a relic in itself, a tangible link between two eras. Imagine wandering through his frozen halls, finding those notes tucked beneath shards of crystal. The ink faded, the pages stiff with frost. You wouldn't need to read the words to understand them. The very act of writing carries emotion, the curve of a letter, the pressure of a hand that once trembled. It's another kind of ghost, lingering in the strokes of ink. The written ghosts of the Mushroom War aren't just carved into walls or scrawled across ancient paper. They live in people too, in how they name things, how they remember sounds that no longer belong to their time. Many of Oo's characters use fragments of old human language without realizing it, like bits of melody caught on the wind. BMO, for example, speaks in a tone that echoes human programming, logical, structured, yet oddly affectionate. The phrases BMO uses might once have been machine prompts or system messages, but now they've evolved into genuine expressions of love and care. That's the strange beauty of Ooh. Every word carries a lineage. Even nonsense sounds might trace back to human syllables long forgotten. The world itself speaks in broken poetry, the leftover rhythm of humanity's last lullaby. And in that way, the Mushroom War didn't just destroy, it transformed. It turned rigid language into something fluid, mystical, and alive. As we wander deeper into this segment, we'll start to notice how these lingering words began shaping the new languages of Ooh, from the magical runes seen on relics, to the playful symbols on Bubblegum's machines, and even the scribbles in Ice King's lonely notes. Each carries a seed of the old world, repurposed by the imagination of the new. Some believe that the very magic of Ooh is born from this transformation, from the fusion of science and scripture, electricity and incantation. After all, when humans tried to master the world, they wrote their dominion into existence in manuals, on blueprints, in endless strings of code. And when those words outlived their writers, when the sky fell and the sea swallowed cities, the meanings blurred. A circuit diagram became a summoning circle. A chemical formula, misread through the haze of centuries, became a spell. It's easy to forget that so many of Oo's most powerful artifacts might once have been ordinary human tools. The Enchiridion, with its dense pages of symbols and diagrams, looks like a magical grimoire. But what if it began as something else? Perhaps it was a book of survival, a guide written in the final days before the Mushroom War, filled with human warnings and wisdom. Over millennia, its purpose shifted. The words eroded, the context vanished, and what remained was a sense of awe. The book's mystery became its magic. That's how it often happens. When knowledge becomes too fragmented to understand, reverence fills the gaps. The people of Ooh don't just read their symbols, they feel them. A rune isn't deciphered. It's felt like a note in a song, a vibration in the heart. In this way, language returns to its earliest form not as a method of instruction, but as an expression of spirit. If we imagine standing among the ruins, the silent, moss-covered walls of an old human city, we might see remnants of both. There, on one wall, a faded stencil reads, "Keep out." On another, a sequence of numbers, perhaps coordinates or a date. In our world, those would be mundane warnings. But to the inhabitants of Oo, those words are sacred geometry. Keep out might be interpreted as a spell of protection. The numbers, a secret code for hidden treasure or divine knowledge. The written ghosts of the Mushroom War are not passive relics. They're alive in how they're perceived, and perhaps, through that collective reverence, they've truly become magical. Belief has a way of transforming what it touches. When 1,000 eyes look upon a symbol and call it sacred, reality bends a little to make it so. In Oo, where imagination and physics intertwine, that belief has literal power. We can see traces of this in Princess Bubblegum's work. Her technology seems futuristic, yet always bears an echo of something ancient. Look closer, and you'll notice her machines are often adorned with writing, glowing glyphs that look halfway between circuitry and spellwork. These are the modern descendants of the Mushroom War's ghosts. The princess may not consciously know it, but she's continuing the same cycle, giving meaning to marks, breathing power into patterns. Each button and rune hums with the same strange blend of science and faith that birthed Oo itself. Even the Ice King and his isolated madness contributes to this legacy. His scrawls across the frozen walls of his kingdom are not merely the writings of a lonely soul, they are echoes of humanity's last voice. The words he writes, often nonsensical, often trembling, carry emotional energy that transcends meaning. When Simon writes, the world remembers what it means to feel. His sentences melt and freeze again in the endless cycle of memory, each phrase another ripple in the frozen air of Oo. And somewhere deep beneath the ice, perhaps in the oldest ruins, the original human languages still sleep. Whole libraries of digital code, compressed and sealed away. If one were to unearth them, they'd find the vocabulary of God's ancient programming languages, capable of reshaping reality itself. What once controlled machines might now control the flow of magic. In that sense, Oo's sorcery is not fantasy at all, but technology that has transcended understanding. When we watch Adventure Time closely, we often see glimpses of this truth. Symbols flicker across the screen in moments of transition on BMO's face, in Prismo's time room, even in the ripples of the multiverse. These aren't just artistic flourishes. They are visual remnants of the world's original code, still pulsing quietly beneath the surface of Oo's whimsical chaos. It's a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, language endures. It evolves, mutates, disguises itself, but never disappears. In Oo, the words of the old world have simply shed their logic and become dreams, and those dreams, in turn, shape everything that lives. Sometimes I like to think that the people of Oo are speaking to us not through translation, but through resonance. Their symbols, their songs, even their nonsense phrases are distorted reflections of our own forgotten speech. When Finn or Jake discover a ruin, when they pause to look at the strange writing on a wall, we too are being reminded of something buried deep within us that need to name, to remember, to give voice to the silence. That's what makes the written ghosts of the Mushroom War so haunting. They are not just memories of destruction. They are evidence of humanity's longing to be understood, even after the end. Every scribble, every rune, every misread warning sign carries that longing forward through time, through mutation, through magic. The language has changed, but the intention remains the same. A whisper that says, "We were here. We spoke. Please remember us." And Oo does remember. Not perfectly, not clearly but in its own fragmented, poetic way. The world hums with our echoes, reshaped into melody. Every glowing rune, every carved symbol is a translation of that same ancient message, still flickering beneath the skin of reality. Because language, even when lost, never really dies. It simply finds new ways to dream. If we think about it, that might be what makes ooh feel so alive. Every object, every fragment of its landscape is speaking in a language we can almost, but not quite understand. The written ghosts of the Mushroom War turn the world into a vast, living manuscript. The rivers are its flowing sentences. The forests, its punctuation. The cities that rose from ruin are like annotations scribbled by time itself, filling the margins of a story that never truly ended. And maybe that's what Finn and Jake are doing without ever realizing it. They're explorers, yes, but also readers traveling through the world like one might wander through the pages of a forgotten book. Each adventure, each discovery, is a translation in motion. They decode the past through touch, laughter, and instinct rather than intellect. It's a kind of literacy born not from knowledge, but from heart. When Finn first discovers ruins from before the Mushroom War, there's always a flicker of wonder in his eyes, a curiosity mixed with an unspoken sadness. He may not know what those strange signs mean, but something deep inside him recognizes them. It's a resonance passed down through generations of memory. He's human. After all, the last thread connecting the present to the age that wrote those words. In his quiet moments, he's not just exploring ooh, he's listening to it. Jake, on the other hand, takes the world's mystery as it comes. For him, language doesn't need to be read to be understood. He speaks the universal tongue of play, joy, and acceptance. In that sense, Jake embodies the way ooh itself interprets the ghosts of the old world, not through logic, but through living. The ruins don't frighten him, they fascinate him. To Jake, a warning label could just as easily be a doodle from the past, something to laugh about rather than mourn. And yet even his laughter adds a line to the world's story, the cheerful counterpoint to humanity's solemn echoes. It's fascinating how often we see written language subtly woven into the show's background. A faded billboard here, a flicker of text on an old computer there. Rarely is it explained, and that's what makes it powerful. Those moments remind us that the show's world isn't entirely separate from ours. It's built upon our remains. The humor, the color, the absurdity, they're all layers of paint over a foundation of ash and memory. But what's truly beautiful is how ooh turned that tragedy into something creative. The people, creatures, and kingdoms built upon those ruins didn't reject the ghosts of language, they reinterpreted them. They turned danger signs into decoration, technical manuals into magical tomes, computer glyphs into mystical patterns. It's as if the world decided that if it could no longer understand its past, it would at least sing it. There's something deeply human about that instinct. Even in our own world, when we lose the literal meaning of something ancient, a word, a symbol, a melody, we fill the gap with imagination. We turn it into myth. That's what the people of ooh have done, and perhaps that's why their world feels so dreamlike. It's a civilization powered by interpretation. The written ghosts of the Mushroom War are, in a way, the roots of that dream. They remind the world that before there was magic, there was meaning. Before there were spells, there were instructions. Before there were runes, there were words. And all of them came from the same human longing to make sense of the world. To reach out and say, this is what I see, this is what I feel, please remember me. Sometimes, if we listen closely during the quiet moments of adventure time when the wind hums through empty valleys, or when Finn and Jake camp beneath the stars, it almost sounds like the world is whispering back. Not in English, not in any tongue we can name, but in a blend of sound and feeling. That's the voice of those written ghosts carried by the breeze. It's language stripped of logic, returned to its purest form, emotion. Maybe that's what language always wanted to be. Not a tool, but a bridge. Something that connects hearts across time, even after the words themselves have faded. Ooh shows us what happens when that bridge breaks and then rebuilds itself from memory and magic. The result is imperfect, but deeply alive, a song that never ends because it keeps learning new verses from those who listen. As the fires of the Mushroom War cooled and life began again, those first creatures of Ooh built their world on what they could not fully understand. And maybe that was the point. Maybe comprehension was never the goal. Maybe the mystery itself was sacred. The past became poetry, and poetry became power. Now when we see the glowing runes etched into the walls of ancient ruins, or the scribbles in Ice King's lonely journals, we're not just looking at remnants of catastrophe. We're witnessing the endurance of expression proof that even when a world ends, the need to speak never does. It only changes shape. And in the quiet heart of Ooh, where the wind carries whispers from long ago, those words are still alive, not as commands or warnings, but as lullabies. The written ghosts of the Mushroom War are no longer mourning what was lost. They're gently singing to what remains. The ruins hum. The symbols glow faintly in the dusk. And somewhere in that light, if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the world dreaming in its sleep, speaking the ancient language of memory, of loss, and of love reborn. There's a kind of quiet that only exists in the Ice Kingdom. It isn't empty silence, but something softer, a silence that hums faintly, like a memory trying to speak. The air there carries a certain rhythm, a frozen pulse beneath the wind. And if you listen long enough, you might begin to notice it. The sound of words caught in ice. The Ice King's home is filled with them. Scribbles, notes, fragments of writing scattered across every surface, walls, floors, even the undersides of tables. Some are written in a shaking hand, others in uneven scrawls that drift between nonsense and poetry. To most, they seem like the ramblings of a lonely old wizard lost to madness. But in truth, they are something deeper. They are the language of grief, written in snow. Simon Petrikov once spoke fluently in the language of the old world, the measured tone of a scholar, the language of reason, research, and discovery. But when the crown found him, it began rewriting his vocabulary. The words he once used with clarity fractured into strange patterns, words that meant nothing yet still felt like they meant everything. What we read in his writing after his transformation isn't the madness of a fool. It's the translation of a mind caught between two worlds. If we look closely, the Ice King's writings are layered, like snow pressed over years of storms. The first layer belongs to Simon, the desperate notes he left as he began to lose himself, messages to Betty, to anyone who might one day understand. They are full of longing and sometimes faint hope. Please forgive me. It's still me inside. Don't forget who I was. These are human words, fragile and trembling, written by a man clinging to the last edges of his identity. But beneath those words, or perhaps above them, a new language formed. The Ice Kings, a language that looks like English but isn't quite. The syntax twists, the rhythm bends. It's the language of obsession, isolation, and unfiltered emotion. When he writes or speaks, his words tumble over one another like snowflakes, individually unique, but together forming a pattern that's strangely beautiful. That's what makes the Ice King's writing so haunting. It's incoherent on the surface, yet deeply expressive beneath it. His words, though scattered, carry the essence of longing. They echo with an ache too heavy to fit neatly into sentences. In that way, his madness becomes a new form of communication, one that transcends language. Sometimes I think about how the Ice King's words might sound if they could be translated properly, not just into English, but into emotion. We might find that every silly line, every frantic note, was really saying something heartbreakingly simple. I miss you. I'm still here. Please see me. The Ice Kingdom itself responds to those emotions. The walls of ice refract his voice, his laughter, his muttered monologues. When he shouts, the echoes don't fade, they linger, stretching into tones that sound almost melodic. His home is a cathedral built from memory and repetition, and every sound becomes part of its frozen scripture. The kingdom doesn't just contain his words, it preserves them, amplifies them, turns them into something eternal. And then there's the way he writes about others, his princesses, his imagined friends, his penguins. Beneath the comedy and delusion, there's a strange tenderness to his phrasing. The way he addresses Gunther, or the way he names each of his invented companions, reveals a desperate attempt to hold on to connection. Each name he invents is like a small prayer, a frozen charm against the silence. Naming things is one of the oldest forms of magic, and Simon, even in his fractured state, still remembers how to wield it. When he writes to or about Princess Bubblegum, there's a pattern of yearning hidden in his nonsense. He praises her with the vocabulary of a man trying to recall romance, but losing the words halfway through. It's as if his heart still remembers love, but his mind no longer knows how to say it. The Ice King's speech is the sound of that struggle, love trying to find a way through madness. In one of his journals, the handwriting shifts midway through a sentence. At first, the words are neat, almost scholarly. Then suddenly, they lurch into uneven scrawls. That single page captures the entire tragedy of Semyon Petrikov, a man mid-transformation, fighting to stay legible as his mind freezes over. It's not just a record of dissent. It's a record of resistance. The Ice King's words are also deeply visual. When he writes, he doesn't simply document, he etches. His letters are jagged, uneven, as if carved into ice itself. Every stroke feels intentional, almost sculptural. You can sense the pressure of his hand, the frustration, the trembling. His penmanship is a landscape full of sharp peaks and soft valleys. And perhaps that's why even his gibberish feels beautiful. It's not about the words themselves, it's about the emotion pressed into them. His writing reminds us of the way snow records the shape of whatever falls upon it. Every footprint, every whisper of wind leaves a mark. In the same way, his words capture fragments of emotion, even when meaning is melted away. What remains is texture, the feeling of sorrow, presses into language like a fossil beneath frost. In the Ice King's world, communication isn't about clarity anymore. It's about persistence. Every word he writes is a small defiance against erasure. Even when no one understands him, he keeps writing, keeps speaking, keeps trying to connect. And in that endless effort, there's something profoundly human, the refusal to go silent. Even when your voice is no longer your own. There's a strange comfort in that persistence, isn't there? The Ice King's endless talking, his scattered writings, they create a rhythm that fills the emptiness around him. Each mumble to Gunther, each letter to a princess who will never read it, keeps him tethered to the world. His words are like tiny campfires, burning in the vast cold of his mind. Without them, he would vanish entirely into the silence of the crown. Sometimes his mutterings sound absurd, even comical. But when you listen closely, when you strip away the humor, you start to hear patterns, phrases that repeat, thoughts that circle back, like someone trapped in a dream trying to remember the right line of a forgotten song. Betty, he says over and over, the name slipping out between nonsense rhymes and babble. It's not just a word, it's a heartbeat. That's what makes his story so tragic and yet so profoundly tender. The Ice King's words are haunted by love. Every line of nonsense hides a yearning for what was once real. Every ridiculous story he tells is an echo of the scholar he used to be, a man who once spoke carefully, who once believed that words could save him. Now they're all he has left. You can see this in the way his writing mixes humor with heartbreak. His notes often read like the diary of someone who refuses to admit how lonely he is. Oh, he jokes with himself and invents silly conversations, gives voice to the silence around him. But between the lines, the truth seeps through the ache of a mind that remembers warmth and can't quite reach it. It's as though every joke is a disguise, every punchline a plea. And perhaps that's the most fascinating thing about the Ice King's language. It's alive in contradiction. It's both sad and funny, coherent and broken, meaningless, and full of meaning all at once. He writes as if his words are snowflakes, delicate, impermanent, unique, yet somehow each one carries the same longing. They fall endlessly, covering the ground of his thoughts, until only the faint shape of Simon remains underneath. The crown's influence makes his speech unpredictable. Sometimes he speaks in bursts of rhyme, sometimes in strange riddles, sometimes in heartfelt confession. It's almost as though the magic itself has its own dialect, one that merges with Simon's human voice to form something entirely new. The language of the crown is cold, commanding, ancient. It doesn't care for emotion or sense. It speaks in impulses. And yet somehow Simon's warmth seeps through it, softening the sharp edges, turning command into lament. We can imagine the crown whispering in his mind, its voice like cracking ice, telling him things in a tongue he doesn't understand. Over time, those whispers blend with his own thoughts, until he can no longer tell where his words end and the crown's begin. The result is a kind of duet, a conversation between man and artifact, grief and power. When he speaks, both are speaking at once. That's why his sentences feel layered, full of contradiction and poetry. Even the way he names things seems shaped by this duality. He gives his penguins names that sound like jokes, but each name is an act of love, a desperate attempt to impose warmth upon a frozen world. In naming them, he's still trying to connect, to create relationships, to give identity to the things that keep him company. The crown might have stolen his memories, but not his instinct to care. Language becomes his last form of tenderness. And sometimes, when he's still for a moment, perhaps staring out from the tallest peak of his icy domain, he mumbles to himself in fragments that sound almost like prayers. They're quiet, broken sentences that loop and stutter, full of strange combinations of words that no longer fit together. But if you listen past the nonsense, what you hear is the rhythm of a man remembering what it felt like to be whole. Those fragments are precious. They are the closest thing to truth that survives inside him. Each one is a shard of Simon's original self, shining faintly through the snowstorm of the crown's madness. He may never return to the man he was, but his words scattered, strange and shimmering, are proof that some part of him still fights to be understood. When you think about it, his writing isn't madness at all. It's translation. Simon is translating grief, loss, and love into whatever form the world will still let him speak. The syntax may be broken, but the feeling is crystal clear. The Ice King's words of snow are not failures of language. They're what happens when emotion outgrows comprehension, when feeling becomes too vast for grammar, too heavy for sense. And so he keeps writing, keeps speaking, keeps filling the frozen air with the language of the in-between half-man, half-memory, half-magic. Each word he breathes into existence melts a little space in the cold, keeping him from disappearing entirely. If you were to step inside the Ice King's chambers, past the jagged curtains of frost, past the flicker of strange blue light, you would find scraps of parchment scattered everywhere. Some are singed, others half frozen, their edges curled like dried petals. They lie in messy drifts, as though he has tried to bury himself beneath his own words. Each one carries a piece of his mind, a glimpse of a thought that didn't know where else to go. On some pages you might find drawings, lopsided sketches of smiling princesses or lonely mountains. On others, tangled phrases spiral around themselves, looping into illegible knots. But if you look closer, patterns begin to emerge. Certain symbols repeat. Crowns, eyes, snowflakes, circles surrounded by lines. These are not random doodles. They are fragments of a private mythology, a language of images that Simon created without realizing it. The crown's runes may have reshaped his words, but it couldn't erase his instinct to create meaning. And so the Ice King speaks in a language that isn't bound to letters. He writes emotions through imagery, fear drawn as a trembling line, longing hidden in the curve of a heart that looks more like a tear. Even when his hands shake, even when his sentences fall apart, there's beauty in the attempt. Because deep down, his every mark says the same thing. I'm still here. There's a quiet tragedy in the way those words are never meant to be read. No one visits long enough to listen. The penguins don't understand, and the princesses flee before he can finish a sentence. So he writes to the walls instead. His icy home becomes his diary. The caverns echo with his monologues. The pillars bear his markings, and even the snow carries the faint rhythm of his breath. Sometimes, when Finn and Jake wander into his lair, they laugh at the nonsense sprawled across the walls, but if they stayed longer, they might notice the repetition. The same names, the same pleas, the same fragments of love letters written in endless variations. It's like a frozen record that keeps skipping back to the same line, refusing to end. What's haunting about this is how language for him becomes a physical presence. It's not just sound or ink anymore. It lives in the ice itself. Each word he speaks fogs the air. Each sigh freezes against the walls. His loneliness literally crystallizes around him. Over time, his palace becomes a monument to his mind, beautiful, dangerous, and unbearably sad. It's easy to think of madness as the loss of coherence, but the Ice King's speech is something else entirely. It's a language under pressure, the product of too many thoughts trying to escape at once. Imagine a man trapped beneath layers of ice, shouting through them, his words warping as they travel upward. What reaches the surface is distorted, but it's still full of meaning if you listen carefully enough. And sometimes the magic lets a clearer voice break through. There are moments, rare but precious, when Simon's tone shifts, when he remembers just enough of who he was to sound human again. His voice softens, the silliness fades, and he speaks like a man waking from a long dream. In those moments, the words are simple. I miss her. I don't understand what's happening to me. They last only a few seconds before the madness swallows him again, but they linger, echoing in the frozen air like the faint toll of a distant bell. These slips of clarity are reminders that his language isn't broken, it's fractured. Every shard still belongs to the same whole. They just don't fit together anymore. It's as if the crown shattered his ability to speak linearly, forcing him to express everything all at once: grief, confusion, hope, humor, like snow swirling in a blizzard. There's no direction, but there's a strange, chaotic beauty in the motion. When you begin to see it this way, his ramblings take on a new light. They become poems written in the language of memory. Each outburst, each rhyme, each nonsensical rant carries an emotional truth that ordinary words can't contain. It's a kind of music, one that only he can hear clearly. And perhaps that's the most human part of him, left the need to make meaning, to shape feeling into sound. Even as his mind fractures, even as his memories dissolve, he still speaks, still writes, still names. In that persistence, there's something sacred, because to speak even into the void is to resist silence, to keep the world awake just a little longer. If you listen closely to the Ice King's words, really listen, you might notice that beneath the nonsense lies a rhythm that feels almost like a lullaby. It rises and falls, not unlike a heartbeat. It's as if he's trying to soothe himself, to rock his own mind to sleep. And maybe, somewhere deep inside that endless winter, Simon is still there whispering to himself, trying to find the right words to dream again. There's something almost ancient about the way the Ice King's voice echoes through his frozen halls. When he speaks, the sound carries far, bouncing between stalactites of ice like a ghostly chant. The cold amplifies him, stretches his words, makes them shimmer. Sometimes they sound like laughter, sometimes like crying, sometimes both at once. If you closed your eyes and listened from afar, you might not be able to tell whether he was singing or mourning. In that echo, there's a kind of sacredness, as if his words aren't just noise, but offerings to something greater. The Ice King, unknowingly, has become a priest of solitude. His every muttered word is a prayer to the past, a ritual of remembering. He doesn't write scripture in books anymore. He inscribes it in frost, letting it melt away each morning, only to begin again. It's a language that refuses permanence, a language as transient as snowflakes. And yet, within that impermanence lies an odd kind of eternity, because his words, though fleeting, never truly disappear. They dissolve into the very air, into the drifting flurries that swirl endlessly around his kingdom. The wind becomes his messenger, carrying his phrases into the endless white. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the peaks, another creature hears a faint echo, a nonsense rhyme that once held the memory of love. This is the paradox of the Ice King's words. They are both fragile and unkillable. He cannot silence them even when he tries. His mind might betray him. His memories might fade. But language clings to him like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. And so he speaks, not to be understood, but to survive. It's said that sound behaves differently in the cold, that the air, dense and still, carries it farther. Maybe that's why his voice lingers long after he's stopped talking, a lonely resonance that refuses to die. If the walls of his palace could speak, they'd murmur endlessly in his tone, reciting his phrases like a choir of frost. In a way, he's built himself a cathedral of memory where every icicle and frozen window pane hums with his unending monologue. We might wonder if he ever senses the weight of those words, the way they surround him like an aura. Perhaps in moments of rare lucidity, he looks around and realizes he's encased not just in ice, but in language layers upon layers of it, each one carrying a fragment of who he was. And maybe for the briefest instant, he understands that this endless talking isn't madness at all. It's preservation. His voice is the one thread keeping Simon alive beneath the Ice King's crown. There's a quiet, almost heartbreaking beauty in that idea, because even when no one is listening, even when the world has long moved on, he continues to speak. His words may be misunderstood or forgotten entirely, but their purpose is deeper than comprehension. They're the sound of a soul refusing to vanish. If you imagine the Ice King asleep, head resting against a frozen throne, crown slightly tilted, you can almost hear him murmuring softly in his dreams. The words tumble out like flakes of snow, each one delicate, glimmering, and gone before it can touch the ground. It's as though his mind can't stop telling stories even in sleep. The act of speaking has become as natural to him as breathing. And maybe that's what connects him, unknowingly, to the rest of Ooh. Because everyone from Finn and Jake to Marceline, from bubblegum to the smallest creature in the Candy Kingdom, speaks their own language of longing. The Ice King's may sound stranger, colder, more broken, but at its heart, it's made of the same thing, the need to be heard, to be known, to leave behind a trace that says, I was here. His words of snow are that trace. They drift across time and memory, glinting faintly in the starlight, vanishing with the dawn. But for as long as they exist, they hold something miraculous, the proof that even in madness, love can find a voice. Even in silence, something human can still be spoken. And when we look at his writings, his tangled notes, his half-frozen diaries, his rambling speeches, we might begin to understand that they are not failures of thought. They are the language of survival, the art of existing in fragments. The Ice King does not speak to make sense. He speaks to stay alive. So perhaps the next time we hear his echo in the distance, that strange, wavering melody of nonsense and sorrow, we might not laugh or turn away. We might pause and listen, just for a moment, to the man inside the storm, to the scholar still whispering beneath the snow, because within that sound, between the cracks of madness, there is still poetry. And if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear Simon's voice rising through the frost, soft, trembling, and full of love, still trying to say one true thing before it fades into the white. Every kingdom in U speaks in its own way, some with words, some with color, some with silence so deep it hums. The surface of this world might look playful candies dancing, clouds giggling, creatures speaking nonsense, but if you pay attention, you'll notice that every corner has its own written language, its own secret alphabet of meaning. These are the scripts of the kingdoms, the symbols that tell us how each realm thinks, feels, and dreams. The Candy Kingdom, for instance, speaks in round, joyful shapes. Its signs are bubbly, handwritten, almost too neat. Every letter looks as though it could melt into sugar if you touched it. Princess Bubblegum's science labs are filled with diagrams that glitter faintly, as though the very ink wants to smile. The walls of her factories, too, are marked with coded recipes and polymer notes, written in looping script. Everything about her language feels precise, yet affectionate, like a scientist who also loves poetry. It reflects her nature perfectly, the rational heart, the warm intellect trying to impose order on chaos. But look a little deeper, and even her handwriting tells a story. Beneath the sweetness lies calculation. The symbols she uses for her experiments are part scientific shorthand, part ancient formula. Some of them date back to the pre-war era, the same shapes once seen on human machinery, now reinterpreted through candy-colored design. It's as if bubblegum rebuilt language itself from the ruins of the old world, coating logic in a layer of charm. The Candy Kingdom's script isn't just communication. It's preservation, disguised as decoration. Then there's the Fire Kingdom. Their symbols are harsher, jagged, often burned directly into stone or metal. The fire people don't write to preserve, they write to command. Their script flickers like flames, all sharp points and sudden curves, as though each letter might scorch the page if you look too long. Some of their inscriptions are ceremonial, etched on the walls of their volcano halls, prayers and warnings to the lava below. Others are tattoos carved into armor or even skin, telling the story of lineage and power. Theirs is a living language, one that breathes and burns and changes shape, depending on who speaks it. And yet, despite its ferocity, there's elegance there too. In the glow of molten light, their runes dance like firelight on water. When Flame Princess writes her decrees, her script crackles faintly, each mark releasing a tiny spark. The language feels alive because it is born from a kingdom that never stops moving, never stops consuming and renewing. To read it is to feel the pulse of something ancient and volatile, the heartbeat of fire itself. The sky kingdoms, those drifting cloud realms high above O, tell their stories differently. Their symbols are not written but woven. They use ribbons of wind and vapor, forming temporary signs that vanish as soon as they are read. Their poetry exists only in the moment of its creation, like the breath that forms it. To a sky being, permanence is unnecessary. The air remembers for them, and deep below in the caverns and ruins beneath the surface, the remnants of the Mushroom War still whisper their mechanical tongue. You can see it in the circuitry that runs through forgotten machines, in the blinking symbols on ancient monitors that no longer have meaning to anyone alive. These are the bones of old languages, fragments of code that once governed entire systems. To the people of U, they are strange relics, glowing glyphs that no one can fully translate, remnants of a civilization that thought in numbers and logic. But perhaps the most fascinating part of U's written diversity is how the languages overlap. In certain corners of the world, you can find walls covered in layers of text candy symbols beside human warning signs, fire runes melting into old military codes. Each civilization adds its mark without erasing the one before, creating a palimpsest of histories. The surface of U becomes a living manuscript, one that keeps rewriting itself with every new age. Sometimes, when the wind shifts across the landscape, it feels like all those languages are still speaking at once. A whisper from before the war mixing with the chatter of a candy citizen, blending with the silent hum of ancient tech. U's very air seems filled with communication, 1,000 voices layered on top of one another. Not all human, not all sane, but all alive. What's beautiful is that even the people who don't understand these languages still respond to them. Finn might not know what the glowing symbols on an old bunker mean, but he feels their weight, their warning. Marceline might not need to read the Fire Kingdom's script to understand its anger. She can sense it in the sharpness of the strokes. U teaches that meaning doesn't only live in translation. It lives in emotion, in the way symbols make us feel before we can think. Language in U is like its magic, fragmented, chaotic yet still deeply connected. Each kingdom writes its own story, but all of them are part of the same sentence, written across the landscape of a world still healing from silence. When you wander through U with that awareness, with eyes tuned to the quiet patterns of its symbols, the world begins to feel like a vast library. Every wall, every tree, every weathered ruin carries a mark of communication. The marshlands speak through ripples on the water, the nightosphere through its impossible geometry, and even the deserts etch their own script in shifting dunes. You start to realize that the land itself remembers, that it too writes in its own strange hand. The Candy Kingdom, so bright and orderly on the surface, hides secret inscriptions underneath. Deep within Bubblegum's laboratories, buried in notes too small for her citizens to see, there are lines written in an older, forgotten script. They look almost human-structured, disciplined, written with the kind of precision that suggests she didn't invent this alphabet, but rediscovered it. Perhaps these were notes left from the old scientists of the pre-war world. Or perhaps, like so many of Bubblegum's creations, they are echoes of herself, her attempts to preserve not just her knowledge, but the very shape of her thoughts. She once told Finn that she made the Candy People because she was lonely. But if you look at the inscriptions on their factories, the designs etched into their walls, you can see that loneliness written right there, a neatness too neat, a structure too perfect. Her language becomes a mirror of her mind, a need to control what cannot be controlled. The world may fall apart again, she seems to say, but at least the words will stay in order. Meanwhile, in the Fire Kingdom, words are chaos made visible. Their inscriptions are not permanent. Flames rewrite them constantly. A decree carved into the wall of the Great Hall might look one way one day, and another the next. The heat reshapes it, giving the illusion that even the language itself is alive, breathing through ash and ember. It's not a written history so much as a living one, retelling itself every time a flame flickers. The flame people don't seek eternity in their writing. They know everything burns. Instead, their script captures the essence of the moment. A vow made by a ruler is recorded, not to be remembered, but to be honored in the present. The writing exists to remind, not to archive. Their oldest temples contain charred inscriptions that crumble at the slightest touch, yet their people speak of them as sacred, the ashes treated as relics. For them, destruction is not an end, but part of the message. To read fire's language is to accept that all things change. And then there's the water nymphs, those quiet wanderers who dwell near the streams that feed into the Ice Kingdom's frozen lakes. Their script is not carved or written, but carried by current. They drop small stones marked with spirals and curves into the riverbeds. When the water flows over them, the stones roll and shift, forming new patterns each season. To the nymphs, meaning isn't fixed, it drifts, reshaping itself endlessly. To understand their messages, one must not look, but wait, watching how the river itself chooses to arrange the words. This is what makes O's written languages so mesmerizing. None of them are static. They breathe, transform, melt, and reform. Like their creators, they adapt. The candy script hums with precision. The fire script burns with vitality. The water script whispers with change. Together, they form a chorus of expression, each kingdom trying in its own way to make sense of existence after the end of the old world. And scattered among them are remnants of human writing warning labels, broken signs, road markers now covered in vines. Sometimes a single word remains legible. Caution, exit, danger. The citizens of Oo no longer know what these mean, but they treat them as talismans. In the grasslands, one family of creatures has even built a shrine around a rusted sign that reads, "Authorized personnel only," believing it to be the name of an ancient god. Well, there's something both funny and sad about that, isn't there? Humanity's language, once used to control and explain everything, has become another kind of mystery, another fairy tale. Ooh, in all its strangeness, has inherited the ruins of a world that tried to define itself with perfect clarity. And now its inhabitants have turned that clarity into poetry. Every script tells the story of what its people value most. The Candy Kingdom values structure and continuity. The Fire Kingdom honors impermanence. The Sky People believe meaning should flow and vanish. And humanity, once obsessed with certainty, has left behind a language that no one can read, but everyone still feels. It's all there, woven into the landscape, a reminder that even in a world rebuilt from magic and chaos, words still matter. If you walk far enough past the places where maps dissolve into rumor, you begin to notice something curious. The scripts of Oo don't just mark boundaries. They bleed into one another. On the edge of the Fire Kingdom, scorched signs carry traces of bubblegum's chemical formulas, burned halfway into illegibility. In the ruins beneath the grasslands, old human lettering mingles with the jagged carvings of monsters that came later, as though each generation of Oo has tried to write over the last, but never completely succeeded. It creates a kind of palimpsest, a layered document written across the world itself. Every mark is both a voice and an echo, part of an endless conversation between civilizations that never met. The Candy Kingdom's soft spirals curve around fire runes. Human numbers crawl beneath magical glyphs, and above them all drift the faint, looping shapes of the sky being wind script. Ooh is the world of rewriting, not erasure. Some historians in the show's lore, especially the more curious candy scholars, believe this fusion isn't coincidence. They whisper that the magic of ooh itself feeds on communication. That language has become a living network of memory. When one civilization writes, its marks ripple through the fabric of the land, subtly influencing others, guiding their evolution. That's why certain symbols appear again and again, the spiral, the eye, the star, not because they were taught, but because ooh remembers. Imagine that. A world where the ground beneath your feet quietly recalls every word ever spoken. The wind might carry fragments of forgotten speech. The trees might whisper in runes carved by time. And perhaps that's why, when someone like Simon writes or sings or even mumbles into the cold, his words don't vanish. They're absorbed, stored somewhere deep within the world's unseen memory. Ooh, in this way, becomes both a storyteller and a listener. In the Water Kingdom, for instance, when the tide is low and the sands shift, ancient letters sometimes appear glowing softly beneath the surface, pulsing with a rhythm like breath. Locals believe these are remnants of the old human world, still dreaming. They say if you trace the letters with your hand, you might hear faint voices, as if the sea itself were reciting old stories. Others claim these glowing scripts are messages from another age of magic, written by beings who knew that one day their words would need to resurface. Every script holds a different philosophy of time. The Candy Kingdom's clean handwriting fights against decay, a rebellion against the inevitability of entropy. The Fire Kingdom's molten glyphs accept decay, letting it burn and renew. The water nymphs embrace change, trusting the river to rearrange meaning as needed. The humans, long gone, tried to freeze meaning permanently to make signs that would never fade. And yet, ironically, their words were the first to crumble. In that contrast lies a quiet lesson, one ooh seems to understand deeply. No language lasts forever, but the desire to communicate does. It's what binds every creature, from princesses to penguins to gods. Words, symbols, songs, they're all attempts to bridge loneliness, to make sense of the world's strange beauty. The longing to connect is what gives ooh its pulse. Even the maps reflect this truth. The maps of ooh are never consistent. Some are drawn in candy ink, some etched in coal, others formed from shifting constellations in the night sky. They contradict each other constantly. Rivers appear where desert should be. Mountains move between drawings. Forests stretch in directions they shouldn't. But that inconsistency is part of the wonder. The maps aren't meant to be accurate. They're meant to be personal. Each one is a record of how its maker saw the world, not how it truly was. Princess Bubblegum's maps are precise, covered in grids and measurements. Marceline's sketches are emotional, focused on the places that matter to her. The cave where she first sang, the ruins where she once waited for Simon. The Ice King's maps are pure dream, drawn in looping lines that lead nowhere, as though he were mapping his own memories instead of land. Together they show that even in cartography, ooh's languages are less about defining reality and more about capturing feeling. The scripts of the kingdoms, in that sense, are like fingerprints of the soul. Each culture leaves behind not just words, but a reflection of how it perceives life and loss. The Candy people, born from Bubblegum's longing, crave order because they fear the chaos that made them. The Fire folk, shaped by destruction, trust only what burns. The Sky beings float between moments, unwilling to stay still long enough to write permanence. And humanity, once masters of meaning, have become legends written in languages no one can read. Yet if you stand in the center of O and listen, truly listen, You might feel that all these languages are still humming together, layered into one soft chorus. Not competing, not replacing one another, but blending into something larger. The sound of the world remembering itself one word at a time. And then there are the quiet corners of ooh, the ones we rarely see, the mushroom-crusted fields, the silent valleys where no candy citizen or fire guard has wandered for centuries. If you look closely there, the languages of the kingdoms blur into something almost organic. Roots twist into symbols that look suspiciously like writing. Rocks bear marks that no tool could have carved, yet they form repeating patterns as if the land itself is trying to write something down. Some travelers have called this earth script a rumor, a myth, a suggestion that ooze soil remembers every alphabet that's ever touched it and keeps trying to speak back. Finn once joked that maybe the dirt was trying to tell him to wash his socks. But BMO, in that innocent, strangely profound way of theirs, responded that maybe the dirt just wanted to be heard. That's the sort of thought that lingers. What if language isn't something that belongs to people at all? What if it's something that the world itself dreams through us, a shared consciousness, expressing itself in countless dialects of existence? The more you think about it, the more sense it makes in ooh. The Flame Kingdom's runes flare with anger or love depending on who writes them. The Candy Kingdom's symbols taste different depending on the emotion poured into them. Even the elemental sigils drawn by Princess Bubblegum shimmer differently depending on her mood. Words are alive here. They react. They evolve. They remember who wrote them. There's a strange tenderness in that. Imagine writing a note to a friend and knowing that, even after it fades, the ink still holds your care somewhere in its particles. Or carving a message into a wall, and centuries later, someone touches it and feels the warmth of your hand. The languages of the kingdoms preserve that intimacy. They turn communication into something sacred, a spell of connection that never truly ends. You can see that philosophy reflected in the architecture, too. The Fire Kingdom's towers are shaped like burning runes, language turned into stone and flame. The Candy Kingdom's bridges resemble looping cursive lines. Even the Ice King's palace, if viewed from above, seems to spiral like a frozen sentence curling inward, written by a lonely hand. It's as though every culture decided that the world itself should speak alongside them. But perhaps the most haunting examples of these scripts are the ones no one can read. The ancient carvings hidden in the caverns beneath the land of ooh, looping symbols that pulse faintly in the dark, neither human nor magical. Some scholars believe they were written by a pre-war civilization, maybe even a species that came before humanity. Others think their ooh's subconscious marks the physical remnants of the planet dreaming, scrawling thoughts across its own body. Whatever their origin, these unreadable glyphs appear in places that matter, near portals, under ruins, on stones that hum with faint energy. The symbols don't just exist, they react. Bring a torch too close, and the light bends strangely. Speak near them, and your words echo with an odd delay, like the walls are thinking. It's unsettling, but also beautiful, as if those forgotten scripts still carry the heartbeat of ooh's first language, a language older than words, older than memory. Princess Bubblegum once theorized that every kingdom's writing system is an attempt to rediscover fragments of this primal tongue. The way the candy characters spiral inward, the fire glyphs burst outward, the ice sigils twist and fracture, all of them mirror natural forces, like echoes of a single ancient pattern. She called it the linguistic root, a universal code buried in the world's bones. If that's true, then every sentence ever written in ooh, from a child's doodle to a wizard's incantation, is part of one infinite poem still being written by the universe itself. Even the maps, those tangled webs of imagination and memory, might be pieces of that poem. When Finn and Jake unfold an old map and the lines shift or shimmer, it could be the world adjusting its own grammar, rewriting its story to fit the moment. A place changes, and so does the language that describes it. Meaning in O is alive. It never stands still long enough to die. And maybe that's the most important truth about the scripts of the kingdoms. They aren't there to separate cultures or declare borders. They're there to remind everyone, candy, flame, ice, or otherwise, that expression is what keeps the world awake. Words are the threads tying magic and matter together. Without them, ooh would be silent, static, and forgotten. When you start to see it that way, the entire world becomes a living manuscript. Its mountains, the capital letters. Its rivers, the flowing sentences. Its winds, the faint whispers between paragraphs. And we, the readers of ooh, are just turning the pages slowly, night after night, tracing our fingers across the lines and wondering what it all means. So as the kingdoms sleep, their letters glowing softly in the dark, the world keeps whispering. Not in any one tongue, but in all of them at once, the lullaby of a land that remembers every word ever spoken. Now we turn our gaze to the maps, the glyphs, and the strange shifting art of how ooh has drawn itself across time. When we think of maps, we usually imagine something simple. Paper, ink, a way to find our way from one place to another. But in ooh, maps are never just directions. They are living memories, and every curve of coastline or symbol of a mountain tells a story much older than the ink it's drawn with. In Finn's time, maps of ooh look whimsical dotted lines, cartoonish islands, and charming little drawings of creatures or landmarks. But those details hide something deeper, because behind the playful look lies a history of catastrophe and rediscovery. Long before ooh became the candy-colored world we know, the earth had broken, reshaped itself, and forgotten its own geography. What used to be continents became islands. Rivers found new beds. Cities were swallowed and others built atop their bones. When people began to draw maps again, they weren't charting new lands, they were retracing ghosts. Some scholars, like Princess Bubblegum, once tried to standardize the mapping of to give structure to a land that constantly changes. But even her maps would shift in ways she couldn't explain. Forests grew in places they shouldn't have. Rivers changed course overnight. And on more than one occasion, the outlines of the Candy Kingdom itself seemed to rearrange, like the land was playing tricks. Bubblegum blamed temporal instability. Others whispered that ooh was alive and that maps could never contain a living thing. Yet there's something poetic in that. The act of mapping in ooh isn't about control. It's an act of wonder, a way to listen to the world and trace its whispers. If you ever look at the maps that appear throughout the show, you'll notice how inconsistent they are. Some label the Ice Kingdom as a sprawling wasteland, others as a tight spiral of glaciers. The grasslands sometimes appear near the Candy Kingdom, sometimes hundreds of miles away. To a cartographer, that would be chaos. But to a dreamer, it's truth. Ooh is a dream. Its borders shift the way thoughts do. And then there are the glyphs, strange markings scrawled across maps, sometimes like notes from explorers, sometimes like prayers. The glyphs are what truly make ooh's cartography so mystical. They aren't just decorations, they react to meaning. Some maps show glowing circles that light up when near ancient ruins. Others have words that fade when spoken aloud. There's even a legend of a map that could only be read under moonlight, where the symbols would rearrange themselves to reveal hidden places. Some say these were designed by the early wizards of ooh, who infused their maps with enchantments. But others think the glyphs came long before magic, remnants of the languages we talked about earlier, the old tongues of the earth, trying to guide its new inhabitants. Perhaps the maps of Oo are like messages passed down through time, each generation adding a line, a mark, a warning, or a dream. Think of how many hands must have touched those maps. Humans before the war, desperate to record the ruins. The first post-war survivors, unsure if the world even had borders anymore. The Candy people, who saw land not as property, but as a place of friendship. And then Finn and Jake, two adventurers mapping not for knowledge, but for the sheer joy of discovery. Each one of them leaving behind traces of themselves, layer upon layer, until the maps became something more like memory than geography. It's said that if you hold an old map of Oo close to your ear, you can hear faint sounds, the hum of cities that no longer exist, the crackle of long-extinguished fires, or the whisper of waves that once touched shores now buried in sugar and stone. That might sound fanciful, but in a land where magic flows like air, who's to say the paper doesn't remember? Some even believe that the glyphs scattered across Oo's maps aren't meant to be read at all. They're meant to be felt. Each symbol carries a vibration, a resonance tied to the emotion of the person who drew it. The more emotion, the stronger the magic. That's why some maps are dangerous to touch. An explorer once tried to redraw an ancient glyph he found near the Nightosphere's gate, and when he finished, the ink began to crawl across the page, spelling words in a language he didn't know. By dawn, the map was blank again, and the explorer was gone. Of course, that might just be a bedtime story. But in Oo, bedtime stories have a habit of being true. So maybe these maps aren't just drawings. Maybe they're spells. Maybe every cartographer in Oo, knowingly or not, is a little bit of a wizard tracing the outlines of the world and giving it definition through intention. Because to draw a line to say, this is the edge, is to create meaning where there was none. The moment a river is named, it becomes part of memory. The instant a mountain is drawn, it becomes real in the minds of those who see it. That's the quiet magic of Oo's cartography. It's not about knowing where you are. It's about remembering who you've been. And if you've ever noticed, the maps in Oo don't always stay still. Sometimes they breathe. Sometimes the lines shimmer faintly when light hits them a certain way, like reflections on rippling water. And sometimes places that were never there before seem to appear between the folds, a tiny mountain, a strange island, a hidden door drawn in pencil that no one remembers adding. Some say it's just the magic of the land seeping through. Others believe that maps in Oo are more than tools, they're portals to understanding, fragments of consciousness made visible on parchment. It's not hard to imagine. Every mapmaker in Oo adds a piece of their own spirit into their work. When a Candy cartographer draws the roads of her home, she's not just marking routes. She's tracing her sense of belonging, the sweet calm of knowing where she fits. When an ice wizard sketches the contours of glaciers, he's not just recording shapes. He's freezing memories of solitude, longing, maybe even love. Over time, those feelings build upon each other until the map itself starts to hum with emotion, almost alive, like a quilt sewn from 1,000 dreams. That's why certain maps seem to respond differently to different people. Marceline once held a map of Oo in her hands, the same map that Finn carried for years, but to her eyes, it showed different landmarks. The shapes of the forest shifted. Lakes she remembered from her childhood appeared where they hadn't been before. Maybe the map wasn't changing at all. Maybe it was reflecting what she remembered of the world, bending the truth gently to match the viewer's heart. There's an old saying among the wizards: a map doesn't show you where you are, it shows you what you believe exists. That might be truer in Oo than anywhere else, because belief is power here. When someone believes in a place when they imagine it, name it, draw it, it can take form. The whole land seems woven from imagination's threads, and maps are how those threads are stitched together. In the Fire Kingdom, some maps are burned onto sheets of tempered glass. The glowing cracks shift subtly with temperature, creating patterns that lead to new volcanic vents or newly formed caverns. Fire people read them like living documents, not fixed records, but ongoing stories of the land's breath. In contrast, the Candy Kingdom's maps are made from pressed sugar sheets and color-coded inks that fade or brighten depending on weather conditions. They were designed that way on purpose to keep track of changes, not just terrain. Because in bubblegum's world, nothing is permanent, not even sweetness. And then there are the maps of the nightosphere. Few have seen them, and fewer still have returned to speak of them. They say the nightosphere's maps are drawn on living parchment that writhes when touched. The lines move, forming labyrinths that never end. The more you stare, the more lost you become, not in geography, but in thought. It's as if those maps aren't of places at all, but of minds, the terrain of emotion, guilt, and memory rendered into endless corridors. A warning, perhaps, that the act of mapping one's inner self can be a dangerous thing. Even BMO once made a map, a childlike, colorful scrawl filled with stars and doodled faces. But if you look closely, every location marked by BMO wasn't a landmark at all, but a memory. Finn's favorite nap spot, Jake's Pancake Hill, Marcy's guitar place. It's funny and sweet, but also profoundly telling, because that's how BMO sees the world, not as space, but as connection. A map of love, more than a map of land. And maybe that's what every map in OO truly is, a reflection of the one who drew it. A mirror of their heart, captured in ink and magic. The lines we draw around the world are just extensions of our own stories. The mountains we name are the struggles we've conquered. The rivers are the things we've let go. Every mark says, I was here. I saw this. It mattered. That's what makes the old maps of OO so moving when you study them. You can feel the ghosts of hands that made them hands that trembled, laughed, hoped, feared. Maps that once guided travelers through forests of glittering fungi, through ruins buried in time. Maps that no longer lead anywhere because the lands they described have changed beyond recognition. Yet the marks remain, whispering of a world that once was. Sometimes, if you lay two old maps side by side, you'll notice they don't quite agree. But if you overlap them carefully, the lines start to align, forming new shapes, like hidden messages revealed only through harmony. Scholars have tried to decode these overlaps, thinking they might lead to treasures or portals. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe those merged lines are showing us something we often forget, that no one version of the world is complete. It takes many perspectives layered together to reveal the full story. And if that's true, then every map of OO, every hand-drawn sketch, every magical parchment is a fragment of the world's collective dream, a dream still being drawn softly in ink and starlight. There's a kind of stillness in those ancient maps, the kind that only time can carve. Some of them are so old that the paper has become brittle as autumn leaves, yet the lines still gleam faintly as if drawn in light instead of ink. They were made by people who never knew the names we give the world now long before OO was called OO. They mark their paths with strange symbols that seem half human, half divine, and when you trace them with your fingers, they feel like veins pulsing softly beneath your touch. Those glyphs are not random. They're echoes. You can sense intent behind them, a meaning that was once understood, but has since slipped beyond memory. It's said that the oldest surviving map of OO, the one rumored to be kept deep within Princess Bubblegum's archives, has no compass. Instead, in each corner of the parchment, there are 4 different words written in 4 different languages. None translate cleanly, but together they roughly mean time, heart, memory, and dream. The directions of U were never north or south, east or west. They were emotional, spiritual, as if the map was designed to lead the traveler not across the land, but through the self. When you start to view the maps that way, everything changes. The crooked trails that twist into spirals aren't paths meant for feet, but journeys meant for souls. The scattered circles and strange marks might not be lakes or ruins at all, but representations of choices, echoes of decisions made long ago. The cartography of U might not be a science of geography. It might be the visual language of feeling, an art of recording emotion in space. And maybe that's why the world responds to those who truly listen to its maps. There are stories of adventurers who wandered off course and found places that shouldn't exist. A hill that sang softly when climbed. A lake that reflected a sky from another season. A forest where the trees whispered in a language that no one could write down. Some believe these travelers didn't get lost at all. They simply began to see the world as the map saw it. Once they stopped looking for where to go and instead followed what felt right, the land opened itself to them. The truth of U's geography seems to depend on awareness. Finn and Jake could visit the same cave twice and find it slightly different each time. A doorway would move, the shape of a tunnel would shift, as though the cave itself remembered who they were and adjusted its form to greet them. Maybe the maps reflect that same living quality. When someone draws a line to capture U, the world notices. It stretches, reshapes, adapts, not out of defiance, but curiosity. The land wants to see how you see it. Magic certainly plays a role, too. Many of the older maps were inscribed with inks derived from enchanted plants, moonleaf, frostroot, whisper moss. These inks don't simply sit on the page. They respond to sound, light, and touch. When exposed to starlight, some of these maps reveal entire constellations hidden in their designs, suggesting that navigation in ancient U wasn't limited to ground travel. Perhaps the first wanderers charted their paths according to the sky, believing that each constellation had a corresponding place upon the earth. To them, walking through the world was like moving through a living sentence, every step another word in the story of existence. There's a quiet kind of reverence in that idea, that by moving, you're writing. By exploring, you're contributing to a cosmic map that links every life and landscape together. Every journey becomes, every path leaves behind a faint glimmer, like a footnote in the universe's diary. BMO once said that maps are just the world's way of remembering who's been kind to it. It's a childlike idea, yet strangely profound. Because maybe kindness is a kind of navigation, too. In a place like U, where the boundaries of reality bend with emotion, the most accurate maps might be the ones drawn with love, patience, and curiosity rather than precision. Maybe that's why Finn's maps, as rough as they were, always seemed to lead somewhere worth finding. You can even sense it in the way the maps age. Some parchments darken as if mourning the lands they no longer match. Others grow brighter with time, as though celebrating the adventures they've inspired. The magic of U doesn't let things remain inert. Every mark matters. Every line has consequence. When a new explorer draws a map, they're not starting fresh, they're adding another verse to an ancient song. The world hums softly beneath them, acknowledging their contribution, reshaping ever so slightly to include their story. It's a living feedback loop, a dialogue between dreamer and dream. The cartography of U is not static. It's a breathing thing, made of countless hands and countless hearts. And maybe that's why no one has ever managed to draw a complete map of U, because the moment you think you've captured it, the moment you declare the border's final, The world gently changes its rhythm, just enough to remind you that discovery is endless, and understanding is always in motion. If you've ever watched the way Finn unrolls a map, how his fingers trace the lines without quite touching them, you might sense the reverence hidden in that simple act. He isn't just looking for a route. He's listening. The crinkle of parchment beneath his hand sounds almost like breathing, as though the map itself sighs in recognition, aware of being seen once more. In that quiet, something sacred unfolds. Every journey he takes and every mountain climbed or sea crossed becomes another word added to the great unfolding story of Oo's geography. And that's the heart of it. Maps in this world are not final. They are conversations between the traveler and the land, between memory and imagination, between what was and what might be again. Each new line drawn is an act of faith, a whisper to the universe that says, I believe this place exists, and in Ooh, belief has power. It's why old maps sometimes come alive at night. If you leave one open under the stars, you might notice faint glimmers along the coastlines, glowing ink following invisible tides. The stars above and the ink below align for a moment, like mirrors sharing the same dream. Wizards once called it the cartographer's hour, the brief span of time when all maps breathe in unison, syncing their stories with the heartbeat of the world. Some claim that's when new lands are born, slipping quietly into existence as the ink flows and settles again. There's an ancient tale about a map that could not be drawn. They say it belonged to an explorer who tried to chart the horizon itself, that thin, shifting edge between sky and land. Every time he tried to capture it, the line blurred. Frustrated, he traveled further and further, chasing that perfect view, until one night he disappeared into the dawn, his footprints stretching endlessly eastward. When others found his map, it was blank, pure white, except for one word written in tiny script at the center. Home. Perhaps that was his destination all along. That story lingers in Oo's culture, a quiet reminder that maps can only take you so far. The rest of the journey is something you have to feel. And maybe that's the true cartography of meaning, the invisible geography of connection, loss, love, and memory that we navigate every day, whether or not we're holding a compass. Even the royal maps of the Candy Kingdom, with their meticulous patterns and shining inks, hide those human fingerprints beneath their order. There's a certain tenderness in how the rivers are drawn, how the little candy cottages tilt slightly as if smiling. They aren't just places, they're affections, carefully inked into permanence. Princess Bubblegum once said that she didn't make maps to control the kingdom. She made them so her people could see themselves a record of their shared sweetness, their unity, their place in the world. In contrast, the Ice King's attempts at mapping were erratic and lonely. His scrolls were covered in frost-bitten edges and jagged lines that rarely connected. But even there, you can see beauty in the chaos, an unspoken yearning to understand his isolation. Some of his maps feature places that don't exist anywhere in Ooh, like the Palace of Old Friends or the Sea of Second Chances. Maybe they weren't meant to be found. Maybe they were just hopes written in frozen ink, pieces of a heart trying to find its way back to warmth. That's what makes Oo's maps so moving. They blur the line between truth and longing, between what is and what's wished for. Every curve, every symbol, carries a whisper of the person who drew it. Even when the map fades, that whisper remains, embedded in the fibers of the parchment, like a secret lullaby. There's also a strange theory, one that Peppermint Butler once muttered half-jokingly, that the entire world of Ooh might be a map, not of land, but of meaning itself. That every river represents a choice, every mountain an emotion, every kingdom an aspect of the soul. When you walk across Ooh, you're walking across consciousness, not just your own, but the collective dreaming of all who ever lived there. It's a thought that's both comforting and dizzying. If you think about it, the maps we draw, whether of who or of our own lives, are always imperfect. They leave things out. They simplify, they distort. But that's not a flaw. It's what gives them power. A perfect map would be useless because it would have no mystery left. The beauty of Oo's maps is that they invite wonder. They leave enough blank space for imagination to breathe. So when the lights are low and a traveler unfolds an old, crumbling map, maybe that's what the world wants, not to be conquered, not to be solved, but to be dreamed about again. Every crease and stain is part of the story, every torn corner a reminder that meaning is never permanent. It drifts, like starlight over calm water. And as the map curls back into itself, its ink glowing faintly one last time, the lesson of Oo's cartography lingers softly in the air. That meaning isn't found by following a line, but by tracing the quiet connection between where we've been and who we've become. Now we're entering quieter territory, a place where words fade and meaning takes a different shape. Tonight, we listen to what can't be spoken. The silent tongue of magic. Magic in Ooh has always been a mystery, not just in how it works, but in how it's expressed. It's everywhere, woven through everything, yet no one truly hears it. The wizards speak in incantations and gestures, but those are only translations, attempts to wrap language around something older than speech. When you strip away the chants, the circles, the bright colors, and strange lights, what's left is a kind of resonance, a pulse. It's like listening to the hum of the world between heartbeats. Some say magic was once a language itself, the first language, before sound, before the rise and fall of civilizations. It didn't use words at all. It used feeling, intention. The way a sigh carries sadness, or the way a glance can convey understanding without a single syllable. In that ancient tongue, to mean something was to make it real. Thought was creation. Emotion was energy. And the universe itself responded to the quiet grammar of will. That might be why so much of Oo's magic feels emotional. The flame kingdom's fires flare brighter when hearts are stirred. Ice King's spells twist around loneliness and longing. Even simple enchantments the kind peppermint butler dabbles in with eerie precision seem tied to feeling more than formula. Wizards may pretend that their craft is rational, but underneath the symbols and rituals, every spell is a confession. Magic in Ooh is a form of honesty. There's a scene some fans remember, quiet and brief. A wizard sits alone under a broken tower, muttering in a language that no one translates. The air around him ripples faintly, not with power, but with grief. The words aren't important. What matters is the silence between them, the rhythm, the intention. You can almost feel what he's saying. That's the unspoken tongue of Oo's magic. It doesn't need to be understood by the mind. It's understood by the world itself. Think of how Gunther's squawks can sometimes change the air, or how Marceline's songs can stir memories buried for centuries. Those aren't spells in the traditional sense, but they're part of the same current. The universe listens to them because they're pure expressions of truth. No lies, no masks, just essence. That's why music often seems to shape reality in Ooh, because sound, in its truest form, is magic trying to remember its first language. And perhaps that's what ancient runes and symbols were always trying to capture. A written record of what once existed as feeling alone. Each glyph, each spiral, each glowing mark etched into a stone or burned into an ancient page, they're all attempts to hold the unholdable. The old mages weren't inventing spells. They were writing down memories of a time when the world spoke back, Maybe that's why their symbols still shimmer faintly when touched. They're not relics, they're echoes, residual syllables of that lost, silent speech. Some even believe that every living thing in U still carries a trace of that tongue deep within, a spark that lets them sense the balance of magic without ever learning how to cast it. When Finn feels that strange chill before the appearance of a powerful entity, or when Jake instinctively knows the shape his body should take to fit a moment, maybe that's their hidden fluency surfacing a kind of cellular memory of the old, wordless magic. It would explain why even the most advanced magical texts in U never quite capture the essence of power. They describe, they diagram, they instruct, but they don't sing. True magic doesn't obey grammar, it obeys emotion. You don't control it, you harmonize with it, like joining a song already in progress. Those who understand that, like Prismo or Betty, don't just use magic, they converse with it. And yet, for all its wonder, there's a sorrow in the silence of magic. Because to speak its true language means letting go of the self. The moment you name what you feel, you step outside it. You translate it into something smaller, something manageable. But magic doesn't live in the manageable. It lives in the infinite. That's why it resists full comprehension. It wants to stay wild, unsaid, and alive. In that way, the silent tongue of magic is like the universe dreaming, constant, endless, never still a story written in vibrations instead of ink. You can't read it. You can only feel it. And if you're quiet enough, if your heart matches the rhythm of O itself, maybe you can start to understand what it's been saying all along. If you listen closely to the world of U, truly listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole being, you begin to sense that this silent tongue never really went away. It hums through every blade of grass that bends to the wind, every ripple in the water of the fire swamp, every flicker in the northern lights above the ice kingdom. Each of these is a syllable in an ancient sentence, one that the universe has been repeating since before time found its rhythm. Even the stars seem to speak in this language. When Finn and Jake once gazed up at the constellations, they might not have realized that those shapes, those glowing patterns etched across the dark, were another form of communication. In some of the oldest scrolls, kept hidden deep within Princess Bubblegum's library, there are diagrams showing constellations paired with runes, like words joined to their celestial counterparts. The theory suggests that when a star shifts or burns out, it alters a letter in the sky, and therefore a word in the cosmic language of U. This idea paints a gentle, haunting picture, that magic, stars, and language are all threads of the same tapestry. When one changes, so do the others. A wizard's spell might tremble because of a distant star collapsing. A new magical plant might bloom because a constellation just formed. The cosmos and U are not separate speakers, but two voices in a single conversation. There's a reason so many mages are found gazing at the heavens. They aren't just studying light, they're reading the oldest book ever written. The symbols they draw in their rituals often mirror the constellations, as if they're tracing words across both land and sky. The soft glow of a rune on parchment is only a reflection of the glow above, and when a spell truly works, it's because both realms, the earthly and the celestial, have momentarily agreed on meaning. But not all who hear this language find peace in it. Some, like Betty Graw, who ventured deep into the realm of magic in her search for Simon, learned that understanding the tongue too clearly can unravel the listener. When Betty merged with the power of Galb, she didn't just witness chaos. She touched the raw syllables of creation, a speech so vast and ancient that it could no longer distinguish between life and unlife, love and loss. Galb itself, perhaps, is not evil, but the unfinished word of the universe, forever forming, never complete. That's what makes the silent tongue so dangerous and so beautiful. To listen too closely is to risk being rewritten, and yet to ignore it is to drift through life without ever feeling the full hum of existence. Wizards walk this thin line every day. Peppermint Butler's cautious reverence for dark magic, for example, isn't just fear, it's respect. He knows that every spell he utters is a translation, a fragile bridge between the human need to control and the magical will to remain free. Even non-magical creatures in Ooh seem to echo fragments of this primal tongue. When BMO dreams and speaks nonsense phrases, there's a rhythm to them, almost melodic, almost ancient. Some fans have theories that BMO's circuits, forged from pre-war technology, might still resonate faintly with the same universal frequency that old wizards once channeled through stone and blood, a mechanical heartbeat that remembers what it was like to be alive before words existed. And maybe that's the key. Maybe the silent tongue of magic isn't just something to learn. Maybe it's something to remember, like a lullaby forgotten in the cradle of time. Every being in Ooh, from a sentient sandwich to a cosmic god, carries a trace of that melody somewhere within. It surfaces in laughter, in grief, in quiet acts of creation. When Marceline strums her bass without singing, the notes that linger in the air carry more weight than words ever could. They hum with memory, with emotion, with that same unspoken power. When Princess Bubblegum's experiments result in something unexpectedly alive, that's the silent tongue speaking through science. When Finn looks across the horizon and feels something shift inside him, that's the same language, too. It's not a language of words, but of knowing. To study the silent tongue, then, is to study life itself. Every sound, every motion, every stillness contributes to its great, eternal sentence. Ooh is fluent in it. The wind doesn't need to explain why it moves. The fire doesn't need to justify its warmth. They just are, and in their being, they speak. So as we drift deeper into tonight's story, remember, magic isn't something to be heard with the ears or spoken with the mouth. It's the pulse between all things, the rhythm that binds the world together, the lullaby that began before we did, and will continue long after the last word fades away. Sometimes when the night in Ooh grows utterly still, the kind of stillness that feels deeper than silence, that's when the tongue of magic is at its most alive. It doesn't roar or sparkle. It doesn't show itself with the grand gestures. It waits in the pause, the space between moments. Wizards call it the breath between breaths, but others describe it differently. To the flame people, it feels like warmth that never burns. To the ice kingdom, it's the hush before a snowflake lands. To the candy citizens, it's the sweetness that lingers after laughter fades. Each kingdom interprets the same language in its own way, as though magic itself changes dialect depending on who's listening. This subtle diversity reveals something remarkable, that magic is not a single language, but a symphony of dialects, all built upon the same unspoken core. Every spell, every natural phenomenon, every heartbeat is a translation of that core truth. The ancient beings of Ooh, those who lived before the Mushroom War, might have understood this perfectly. It's why their ruins hum faintly when touched, or why old relics pulse to life when handled with care. They weren't just tools. They were phrases left behind, sentences made of matter. Consider the Enchiridion, the legendary book of heroes. Its words seem simple at first, a manual of quests and virtues, but the pages themselves are alive with enchantment. When Finn first opened it, he unknowingly began to read not just the words, but the emotions encoded in the ink. Some have suggested that the book's power doesn't come from the information it holds, but from the intention of those who wrote it. The scribes didn't write to instruct. They wrote to remember the language of magic, each phrase a whisper of how to live in tune with it. This is why Oo's languages and symbols always seem to loop back to one another. What looks like nonsense scrawled on a wall often mirrors something found in a wizard's tome. The glyphs that appear during powerful spells can sometimes be found in the patterns of certain flowers or in the crystalline growths within the Ice King's crown. These repetitions are not coincidences, they are reminders. The world itself is fluent, and everything in it occasionally echoes a word from that hidden tongue. And then there are moments when the silent language becomes visible, when it briefly manifests in light or sound or motion. Think of Prismo's time room, where reality folds and glows in a soft amber tone. When he speaks, his words ripple the fabric of existence, not because he's casting spells, but because he's conversing with the very grammar of creation. His voice doesn't command, it harmonizes. He is not telling the universe what to do, he's singing along to what it's already doing. That's why his magic feels gentle, inevitable, and oddly comforting. By contrast, Gob's presence is dissonance, the sound of the universe mispronouncing itself. Every fragment of chaos it brings, every distortion of reality, is like a crack in the syntax of the cosmos. It's what happens when the silent tongue forgets how to be gentle. Yet even in Gob's destruction, there's a kind of truth. The breaking of words is still a kind of communication. Silence doesn't disappear, it shifts shape. It reminds Oo that balance and chaos, creation and erasure, are just different inflections of the same universal sentence. There's a quiet beauty in that. The idea that all existence, even its mistakes, still belongs to the same song. It means that the Ice King's lonely ramblings, Princess Bubblegum's precise equations, and Finn's spontaneous acts of heroism are all, in their own ways, fluent. None of them are fluent on purpose. They're fluent because they're alive. Because to live in Oo is to speak without realizing it. Every laugh, every tear, every burst of light or shadow adds another word to the great unspoken story. When you think of it like that, even death doesn't seem like an ending, just another kind of silence. A pause before the next stanza of the universe begins. Many magical scholars, and even Death himself, have suggested that what comes after life isn't a different realm, but a quieter one. A place where the silent tongue is spoken purely, without interruption. That would explain why ghosts in Oo don't always speak. They shimmer, they hum, they flicker in and out of visibility. They've gone beyond the need for words, beyond translation. And maybe one day, everyone and everything returns to that state. Back to the hum, the pulse, the wordless rhythm. Back to the dream of the universe before language. That's why the great magical beings like Prismo or even Orgalorg in its prime seem both ancient and newborn. They live closer to the source. They remember the lullaby that created the world. To them, reality isn't a story being told. It's a song being sung, softly, endlessly, into the quiet dark. So when you lie there, listening to the soft creaks of your room, the whisper of wind outside, the slow, steady beat of your heart, know that you are part of that same melody. You don't need to cast a spell or speak a word. You're already fluent in the only language that truly matters in Oo, the silent one, the one that never began and never ends. Some say that deep beneath Ooh, far below the Candy Kingdom, under layers of stone and time, there's a chamber where the silent tongue still speaks in its purest form. It's not guarded by monsters or sealed with spells. It's simply quiet. So quiet that anyone who enters begins to hear the hum of their own heartbeat echoing against the stone. That hum joins with others, a slow, deep chord that vibrates through the walls, the air, even the soul. Those who have heard it describe it as the most peaceful sound imaginable, like the world breathing in its sleep. Perhaps that's what magic really is, the sound of existence dreaming itself into being. Legends say that those who stay too long in that chamber begin to lose their words entirely. They stop speaking, stop thinking in sentences. Instead, they feel thoughts as sensations: warmth, light, gravity, stillness. The mind becomes soft, like sand at the bottom of a tide pool. They no longer need to name anything, because everything is simply known. That is the final dialect of the silent tongue, beyond translation, beyond comprehension. It's what wizards, poets, and wanderers have been chasing for centuries, each in their own way. Even Simon, long after shedding the Ice King's madness, might still remember fragments of that ancient song. In the cold silence of his crown, he touched something eternal, a resonance that both comforted and consumed him. Maybe that's why, even in his confusion, his words often carried strange poetry. Somewhere deep inside, the silent language was still echoing, reminding him of a time before isolation, before the crown, when the world still sang in harmony. It makes you wonder how much of the magic in Ooh comes not from deliberate intention, but from longing, from that ache, to reconnect with something vast and wordless. The desire to return to a state where communication didn't require symbols or sounds or even faces, where understanding simply was. The longing shapes everything. The Ice King's endless songs, Princess Bubblegum's constant drive to create life, Marceline's centuries of music, Finn's restless search for meaning. All of them, knowingly or not, are trying to speak that silent language again, to feel what the universe felt when it first woke up and whispered itself into existence. Perhaps that's what love is in Ooh's truest form. Not words or gestures, but resonance. Two beings vibrating in harmony, their frequencies aligning for time before drifting apart again. That's why even heartbreak can feel strangely sacred there, because it too is part of the song. The minor chords are as essential as the major ones. Every joy, every sorrow adds to the fullness of the melody. And if we think of Ooh itself, the whole land, as a single living being, then it too is still singing. The rivers hum its bass line, the wind carries its chorus, and the creatures of every kingdom fill in the verses. The remnants of the Mushroom War, the ruins of forgotten cities, the overgrown temples and glowing runes, they're all part of the harmony. Even destruction has its tone. The end of the world wasn't silence. It was a rest between movements, a breath before a new verse began. Maybe that's why the people of Ooh, no matter how strange or whimsical, always seem to find their way back to balance. Because they're attuned, even unconsciously, to that music. Every kingdom speaks in its own accent. Candy, flame, ice, slime, but all of them are part of the same quiet conversation. The same song that once hummed through the stars before time began. So the next time you watch Finn and Jake lying beneath the twilight sky, or hear Marceline strumming a soft tune to no one in particular, think of it as the world remembering its own lullaby. The same melody that the stars hum, the trees sigh, and even the ancient ruins whisper when the wind passes through their cracks. It's the language of magic, yes, but also the language of rest, of peace, of being exactly where you are. Because in the end, all words fall away. The stories, the symbols, the names, they fade back into the stillness that birthed them. What remains is the quiet pulse that connects everything. The truth that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. And that's where we'll leave Ooh tonight. Not in chaos, not in mystery, but in quiet harmony. A world still singing softly to itself in a language that no one speaks and everyone feels. So as you rest your head and close your eyes, remember, you too are part of that song. The hum beneath the stars, the whisper between dreams. The world listens when you breathe. Good night.